please take your Bibles and open to Isaiah 39. I think Nate was just messing up to make me feel better for my horrible math on Wednesday. Doesn't want me to be alone. Isaiah chapter 39. This was a message that I believe was back when Pastor was going through Nehemiah that kind of struck me. I've titled this, Not in My Day. So we'll read through the whole of chapter 39 and open in a word of prayer. At that time, Merodach-Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he had heard that he had been sick and was recovered. And Hezekiah was glad of them, and showed them the house of his precious things, the silver and the gold and the spices and the precious ointment, and all the house of his armor, and all that was found in his treasures. There was nothing in his house, nor in all his dominion, that Hezekiah showed them not. Then came Isaiah the prophet unto King Hezekiah, and said unto him, What said these men? And from whence came they unto thee? And Hezekiah said, They are come from a far country unto me, even from Babylon. Then said he, And what have they seen in thine house? And Hezekiah answered, All that is in mine house have they seen. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not showed them. Then said Isaiah to Hezekiah, Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days come that all that is in thine house, and that which thy fathers have laid up in store until this day, shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. And of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Then said Hezekiah to Isaiah, Good is the word of the Lord, which thou hast spoken. He said, Moreover, for there shall be peace and truth in my days. Let's open with a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, thankful for this solemn warning in this chapter. I pray that you'd help me to preach it right, strengthen me. I pray that this would be edifying or convicting as need be to the hearers today. It's in thy Son's name I pray. Amen. So I've titled this Not in My Day, and I want to take a brief step back and just have a quick introduction to set up this passage. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, but Hezekiah was one of the most prosperous and blessed kings of the southern kingdom of Judah. Right before his miraculous healing and extension of life that we'll get to in a moment, right before this passage, he had reigned for 14 years. He was 25 years old when he came to the throne of Judah, and he had reigned 14 years. He's one of only 3 kings after Solomon that is listed as doing that which was right in the sight of the Lord according to all that David his father had done. We see this in 2 Chronicles 29:2. The only other 2, he's in rarefied air. He's with Jehoshaphat, and he's with Josiah, who is Hezekiah's great-grandson, which is, that's pretty sad. There were quite a number of they did things right. I believe it was Pastor who preached it. He did, I think it was Amaziah. He did it, but he followed after the ways of the Lord, but not with a perfect heart. And then his son would follow after in the ways of Amaziah. So, he pretty much did the same thing. It wasn't with a perfect heart, but he kind of did that which was right. But no, Hezekiah is one of only 3 he followed the Lord like David, his father. He saw a spiritual revival in the nation, at least on a surface level. Early in his reign, it seems like the people were they genuinely wanted to be sanctified. There's a whole section on the sanctification of the people. And it doesn't seem like it lasted very long because obviously Manasseh came along right after Hezekiah, and the people just went right with that wicked king. But at least here, he oversaw a spiritual revival, and based off of the celebration of the Passover that was done under Hezekiah, the Bible says the like had not been seen since Solomon, the son of David. So we're talking quite the desire to return to the old ways, to the godly ways, to follow after the law. And then to boot, Judah seems to have been in something of a golden age for engineering. engineering feats. I'm an engineer. I like it when the Bible talks about engineering, even though it's, obviously for good reason, only a limited number of verses. But Uzziah, his great-grandfather, 32 years prior to the start of Hezekiah's reign, had cunning men build engines of war on the walls of Jerusalem. And Hezekiah continued these feats by building the conduit under the walls of Jerusalem that brought that fresh water from outside the walls to inside the city and made them significantly more resilient against siege, which would come in handy. But yet, in spite of all of these victories, these good signs, these good things that Hezekiah did, we begin to see cracks forming in the 14th year of Hezekiah's reign. This is when the Assyrians begin to invade Judah. They came down through northern Israel. They wiped up, I believe it was Hoshea, who was the king of the final king of the northern kingdom. They took them away, scattered them to the four winds, and then they moved on to the southern kingdom with the intent of doing the same thing to Judah. And when this happens, if you turn over just briefly to 2 Kings chapter 18, we'll get just a brief glimpse into maybe some chinks in Hezekiah's armor, if I can ever get there here. 2 Kings chapter 18. We'll be looking at verses 13 through 16. Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah did Sennacherib, king of Assyria, come up against all the fenced cities of Judah and took them. And Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria to Lachish, saying, I have offended. Return from me, that which thou puttest on me will I bear. And the king of Assyria appointed unto Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. And Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house. At that time did Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord and from the pillars which Hezekiah king of Judah had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. So here, Nate was talking about fear just a few minutes, and this is something I think is going to be interesting. There's a number of topics that Nate touched on. It's like to reference a certain former presidential candidate's favorite mathematical system. The Venn diagram of our messages kind of overlap a little bit, and so I'm gonna hit on some of the same things that he hit on. So he said double-barreled shotgun, make it triple. So Nate talked about fear, and here we see that Hezekiah's fear is getting the best of him. Rather than trusting in God, Nate said fear is a lack of trust in God. That's exactly what happened here. Rather than trusting in God that he was going to take care of the nation, he was going to take care of his kingdom, the kingdom had been promised. Instead of trusting God that he was going to take that, he took matters into his own hands. And, it was bad enough that he spoiled the treasures of Israel, but then not only that, to add insult to injury, he goes and takes gold from God's house and sends it to the Assyrians to try to get them to go away. That's like robbing the church treasury to make somebody go. That's not right. Not right at all. Now, to Hezekiah's credit, when the crucible was fully engaged and the Assyrian army, the full might of the Assyrian army, closed down upon Jerusalem, at that time, Hezekiah was fully trusting in God. You go and read the prayer that he prayed to God when he spread out the letter that the Assyrians sent to him. He was laying it all out on the table. He was at the end of himself, and he was trusting in God. And indeed, what better person was there to place his trust in when you have at least 185,000 enemy soldiers, enemy combatants outside your walls, just waiting to do you in, right? And the Lord intervenes miraculously. Again, most of you know this, and in a single night makes the bloodiest battles in history seem like a playground melee of schoolboys. 185,000 men of war slain. And note, this is not just a militia. This is not a disorganized rabble. This is the greatest, at that time, the greatest empire on the face of the earth, the Assyrian Empire. Right. To put this into perspective, Antietam, during the Civil War, the Battle of Antietam, is the single bloodiest day in all of American history, with 4,000 dead in a single day and more than 16,000 wounded. Put this into perspective. The total number of forces engaged in September of 1862, 140,000. So the casualties that the Assyrians took would have wiped out the entirety of the northern and southern armies. Again, from the Civil War, the largest battle ever fought on American soil is, come on, history lesson. There you go, Nate. Gettysburg, yes. Total forces engaged, 160,000. So what the Lord did to the Assyrians still would have wiped out every single combatant on both sides. Can anybody tell me what is believed to be the single bloodiest day in all of human history? No. It's the Battle of Borodino during the Napoleonic Wars in 1812. So Napoleon had invaded Russia, and the Russians finally cobbled together enough of a force to actually take on Napoleon at the Battle of Borodino in 1812. 80,000 killed and wounded in a 24-hour period. One 24-hour period. That's a number I think we have a hard time wrapping our heads around. But once again, what God did to the Assyrians makes that's 100,000 more than what we, in our modern era. How do you even conceive that? The Lord, this by any standard is a victory of colossal proportions. So the Lord delivers Hezekiah. There's a relief. But disaster strikes again, right? Hezekiah is sick unto death. One might almost believe it's the stress of the Assyrians that has him sick. I don't know that for sure, and I want to keep in mind that he's only 39. Hezekiah is only 39 when he is sick unto death, when he's described as sick unto the death in the Bible. And for us, I think it's easy in hindsight for us to see that God knew what was going to happen if Hezekiah lived longer. He knew Manasseh was going to come onto the scene, and he was going to essentially put Israel into, there was no going back. The Lord was not going to forgive the blood, the innocent blood that was shed by Manasseh. So it's easy for us to berate Hezekiah for asking for more years. But I suspect if any of us, if me being 30 years old, knew that this was going to happen, I probably would be praying the exact same thing. Be like, Lord, please heal me. I want to live longer. Pastor's been talking about that. I don't want to go on the next bus. So I doubt that if push came to shove, any of us would decline from asking for more time. And once again, the Lord, even though he knew what was coming, mercifully responds to his pleas and grants him 15 years more. And that brings us to our text and Hezekiah's catastrophic attitude. So my first point is, not in my day. It's not going to happen in my day. These 4 words. And I think the parallel passage in 2 Kings 20:19 to this brings out the complacency. Then said Hezekiah unto Isaiah, Good is the word of the Lord which thou hast spoken. And he said, Is it not good if peace and truth be in my days? I have a hard time wrapping my head around this attitude, but yet it is one that creeps into every single one of our lives at one time or another. Complacency, a feeling of contentment or self-satisfaction, especially when coupled with an unawareness of danger, trouble, or controversy, or a disregard for consequences, which is what we see right here. And what makes this so insidious is that Hezekiah had just had 2 major triumphs in life. And this is when complacency is the most likely to strike. There's actually, I was just listening to a podcast which was about catastrophes and how people react to them. And the funny thing is that usually when a catastrophe happens, people just go, it's almost like shock, but it's just kind of, the example they gave was that of plane crashes. And they actually say, you might know this, that I believe it was 59% of all significant mass casualty events could have been survived when it comes to aircraft crashes. And the reason that they turned into mass casualty events is because after the plane lands and most people survived the initial crash, everybody just kind of goes, whew, we survived. And then everybody just kind of starts milling about like they're fine, and they go to get their luggage. There's no urgency to get off the plane, because what happens when a plane crashes? There's fuel everywhere. There's going to be a fire. You have like 2 minutes to get off the plane before the plane's going to go up in flames. They become complacent because, hey, we just survived this big thing. We must not have anything else to worry about. You know, it's my lucky day. But this same thing seems to have happened to Hezekiah. He's won 2 major physical battles. He's seen his enemy thoroughly defeated. Like, you don't just raise 185,000 men the next day. And he's been miraculously healed. He's even had a sign where the sun moved, where the dial on the sundial moved backwards 10 degrees. He's had he's seen multiple miracles go on in the space of a year. And now complacency, but specifically, where does that come from? Well, the first thing I thought of is comfort. Complacency can only come from when you're comfortable, usually. I'm sure that some thought similar to, I have just come through so much. Why not just take a step back? You know, maybe I don't have to follow God's law so closely. I mean, after all, I've clearly got his favor, right? The Lord saw fit to deliver me from my enemies. He healed me from my diseases. And now I've got these Babylonian fellas coming over, and they want to congratulate me. I've got to have God's favor, so, you know, I'm just going to take a step back. And comfort in and of itself, to take comfort, is not necessarily a bad thing. I want to emphasize this. Why are we, Paul, when he instructed us to pray for those in authority, what is the purpose? Why are we to pray for those in authority? That we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. Essentially, that we may lead a godly life without fear of persecution. That is, comfortably. You know, we might not have everything we want, but at least we're not under threat of being led to the stake or being whipped, as our Baptist forefathers have been. And Hezekiah seemed to have it all. He had just been granted 15 more years to live. As I mentioned, his primary enemies had been thoroughly crippled. He was probably the most prosperous king since Solomon in the southern kingdom. If you read 39:2, and Hezekiah was glad of them, that is the embassage from Babylon, and showed them the house of his precious things, the silver and the gold and the spices and the precious ointment, and all the house of his armor, and all that was found in his treasures. And based off of the Babylonian response, it must have been quite a sizable treasure trove, because Isaiah states the reason that they're coming, that they are going to come to Israel, is because of what they saw in your house. They want that treasure. So it's reasonable to assume he's one of the, if not the most prosperous king since Solomon. And so he was comfortable and could be fairly sure that he would be that way for the rest of his life, since, unlike the vast majority of us, he knew when he was going to die. He knew he had 15 more years. He knew it was unlikely that the Assyrians would be back in that time period. He was set as far as he was concerned. But it's not comfort. The problem was that he took those blessings and focused on himself, which brings me to my next point. Comfort combined with selfishness leads to complacency. Again, I can easily see the thought, I have been through a lot, let me take it easy. Slipping into Hezekiah's attitude. Everything suddenly becomes about me. The first-person pronouns really start popping out at this point. This ultimate attitude that the world revolves around me. Whatever happens to me in my time is all that matters, regardless of any other facts, regardless of how this impacts my future generations, no matter how it affects the nation at large. All that matters is what happens to me in my time. How very short-sighted is this? This is a very similar attitude, though obviously not the same magnitude. But this is a very similar attitude to the Jews crying for Christ's blood to be upon them and their children. I suspect they greatly regret that call. But yet, how often do we fail to consider the effects of our decisions on others? Not just in our physical lives, but also their spiritual, right? Paul was aware of this at all times. When he was writing to the Corinthians, he said that he would rather give up meat than cause a brother to offend. He was always aware of how his actions might impact others around him. Paul was not a selfish person by any means. But we see that Hezekiah is giving in to that, just matters what happens to me. I will have peace and truth in my days. He even dresses it up to sound good, right? I will have peace and truth. Sounds like he's being spiritual. He's got everything together. He desires truth. Last, and this is, it's dangerous. The end result of this is dangerous. Every country and empire that has experienced comfort and is selfish collapses. The Roman Empire is like well, I mean, I could look at the United States too, but the Roman Empire, we can look back and literally say, here's when this happened, here's when that happened. We can watch the decline. You can watch the decline of the end of citizen soldiers and hiring out mercenaries to fight for them, that sort of thing. They experienced comfort and they turned in on themselves. They didn't want to do the work themselves. Their empire crumbled. Britain, if you've been following the news, that used to be an empire that the sun never set upon. And look at where they are today. The English are fighting for their very homeland at this point. Wars and battles where one side assumes to have the victory, they're presumptuous, they're complacent, have often been the victims of their own complacency. Think Thermopylae. The Persians thought that they could run over the Greeks. I mean, it was I'm going to try to make sure I do the math right here so I don't embarrass myself again. It was roughly 10-1. The Persians are estimated to have 70 or 80,000 troops. Some say as much as 300,000, but generally I think that's considered to be exaggeration by Greek historians, versus about 7,000 Greeks. And the Persians thought they would steamroll over. Instead, they spend 3 days trying to push aside the stubborn Greeks. And they lost a good chunk of their manpower in the fight. And for the saved, for us, the Christian life is no different. Perhaps we win a victory in our personal lives and then decide that, I'm on a mountaintop right now. I don't need to keep on fighting. I've reached the crest of this peak. I don't need to start reaching for the next peak. I can take it easy for the time being. And we'd end up we let our guard down. We're not as vigilant as we were before. Perhaps, even worse than that, perhaps we believe that, like that wicked servant that the Lord spoke of, perhaps we say, the Lord delayeth his coming. And so we will enjoy a little taste of this world. We all know what happened to that wicked servant. The Lord came in an hour he did not expect. And he destroyed that wicked servant. Perhaps we've gotten complacent. The pastor often reminds us of the imminency of the Lord's return. And I do believe that those who have professed to be Christians, but are not really, when the Lord comes, it's going to be too late. Not something you want to be complacent in. We'll touch on that more in just a moment. Perhaps we are complacent in just allowing the world into our homes and families because, hey, I work hard and I deserve a little enjoyment. And we forget the impact that maybe that enjoyment, so-called, has on our children. We want to be able to listen to some music that, it's not that bad. Forgetting that what we do, our children will do in excess. Again, this is overlapping with what Nate preached. Children will pick up on that complacency. They will always do what you do in excess. So-called Christianity is full of people who would rather indulge themselves at the price of their children rather than sacrifice their flesh to see them succeed spiritually. So I ask, for those of you that claim to be saved, would you hold your sin with souls at stake? Again, this is almost exactly what Nate was talking about this morning. And I'm going to take his analogy of the lights. This reminds me of the story behind the hymn, Let the Lower Lights Be Burning. It fits right into the complacency. If you know the story, there was ships would come in the Great Lakes, and often there were great storms that would sweep over the Great Lakes. Vicious. There have been many wrecks there. This is late 1800s, 1880s, I believe. And they had built a little offlet so that ships passing through could slip into this little outlet where they could weather out the storm safely. And there was a big lighthouse, again, as Nate was talking about, that could light the way. You knew the general location where this safe harbor was. But there were lower lights. There were these lights that marked the edge of the causeway that would allow ships to guide right past it. And there was a man whose job it was to go and light those lights every night. And one night there was a storm. And the man said, well, there have been no ships that have ever used this causeway. I don't feel like lighting the lights tonight. And he didn't. And lo and behold, a ship did come. And the lower lights were out. And that ship ran aground. And the vast majority of the crew was lost. All because somebody became complacent. And again, to fit right in with what Nate was saying, if we become complacent in our Christian lives, if we are not letting our light shine, if our salt has lost his savor, what judgment awaits us? Would you hold your sin with souls at stake? For the unsaved, complacency is the default attitude of the unsaved. Eat, drink, and be merry defines the unsaved. Why? Well, because there is no hope. What else do we have to live for other than what's right now? The world is oh so complacent, and indeed this is even one of their arguments against believing. 2 Peter 3:4, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning. I can be complacent. Nothing's actually going to happen. Judgment is never actually going to come. I can live my life how I want with no fear of consequences. The definition of complacency. And there can be no topic that is more dangerous to be complacent about than regards to your salvation. I was at... Perhaps people might think me weird for this, but I actually kind of enjoy walking through cemeteries. I think I told you about the one that I found back when I was hunting back last fall. And just realizing it was a cemetery from the early 1800s, late 1700s. And a lot of the people there never made it out of their 20s. There were a number of markers that didn't even have a name. It was probably just a baby that was born, didn't make it, and they buried it. And then the other day I was at my aunt's burial, and I just was pacing amongst some of the stones, and there was somebody who died the very day I was born, like to the day, November 11th, 1994. And it struck me that, as I was being born, somebody else was passing off the scene. And I was reminded of how fragile life is, how brief life is. The Bible warns against the complacency of assuming there is more time, because Proverbs 27:1 says, "Boast not thyself of tomorrow." Don't think about what you're going to do tomorrow. Don't say, "Tomorrow is my day of salvation," for thou knowest not what the day may bring forth. Many a person younger than I has had their life cut short. They didn't have a tomorrow. Nate and Pastor have told stories of those that they witnessed to. They said, "I'll do it later." And they didn't get later. They didn't get later. Behold, now is the day of salvation. Not later. Don't be complacent about your salvation, your position with God. And then point 2, it's the same 4 words, "not in my day." But it's said with a very different attitude. Not in my day. Great men of history did not become great by sitting on their hands. The patriots of the American Revolution fought so that their children might enjoy the blessings of liberty. There is certainly, and I am going to touch on this temporal application of this principle, because it does impact how we vote. Standing for our liberty. Why? Because I want my boys to be able to enjoy at least a similar taste of the freedom that I have been so blessed with. The ability to continue to come to church, unafraid of the government coming in and arresting us because we preach against sin, for example. I want them to be able to choose the job that they want to go into, not have it defined by them by some overarching bureaucracy. I want them to excel as citizens. I think I mentioned this previously. I want to vote for politicians that will make me take the pain now, whether it's economic or anything else, so that my children might live in peace and prosperity. I would rather have my paycheck be wiped out so that they might have a better chance of a future, than for me to just kick the can down the road and say, "In my day, I will be prosperous, but my children are going to have to pay the price." We've already seen the results of generations doing this. But the far more important way of saying this, "not in my day," is that we, like the faithful men of God who have gone on before us, who said, "I'm not going to compromise. I'm going to stand. Not in my day will I compromise." This is the precise same attitude we ought to have regarding our Christian lives. For the saved, again, how you behave, again, this is literally what I wrote, how you behave now impacts how your children will behave. Abraham and Sarah had this vision, Hebrews 11:15 and 16. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. If they wanted what the world had, they could have had it. But they desire a better country that isn't heavenly. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, thieves break through and steal. For us, the call is loud and clear to not be caught up with the world and the things that are in the world. As Pastor preached a couple of weeks ago, if any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. And I want to emphasize, sometimes we as Christians, again, we'll be like Hezekiah. We'll dress it up as to why we want something in my day. Stress is often one of those. You know, I've had a long day at work. And I just don't feel like doing family devotions. I'm just going to skip it now. Your children are going to pick up on that. It seems like a little thing, doesn't it? I'm just tired. I've been recently trying to teach, well, not recently, it's been a little bit of a battle. But I've been trying to teach my boys that simply when you're tired and hungry does not permit you to throw tantrums. If every time I was hungry or I was tired, and that was like a free pass to me doing whatever I wanted, getting upset at my boss or whatever it was, if that was, boy, I'd just have a heyday, right? I'd have so many free passes because I'm tired all the time. But no, that's no excuse whatsoever. The call is for us to stand, do what's right, regardless of how we feel. That's why Hezekiah is not excused. Yes, he had come through some stressful time. I don't think any of us can even imagine. Can you imagine Hezekiah? He's probably sick at the same time as the invasion is happening, as the Assyrians have besieged Jerusalem. And the Lord delivers him from that. And then he's healed. That was a lot of stress. But Hezekiah was not excused for his sin in showing. Did the Lord mince any words as to what was going to happen to Jerusalem? It's like, well, I get it. He's been through an awful lot. He wants to show off his wealth and all of that. I'll let it slide. The Lord didn't react like that whatsoever. It's like, nope. The days are coming. And they weren't that far off. Well, I guess they were about 100 years off. When everything that you enjoy or that you are enjoying right now is going to be gone. I want you. I knew I was going somewhere and I lost it. Hezekiah was in as much a crucible as may be possible, with disease threatening to consume on the one hand, and the Assyrians on the other. And the Assyrians, if you know anything about history, the Assyrians were not exactly known for their tender mercies. The Assyrians were a brutal empire. So he was under a fair bit of stress. If you surrender, surrender was not a pleasant option. If you got defeated by them, he only had to look north to what the Assyrians had already done to the northern kingdom to have an idea of what that was going to be like. So for we as Christians, we should resolve that we will not compromise in our day. We will not become complacent as others have. And again, I will reiterate to the unsaved that the call for salvation is now. And on a related note to this, we ought to resolve not to waste the opportunities we are given. Hezekiah was given tremendous blessings, was he not? It's not wrong for us to ask for blessings from our God. But if we misuse them, Hezekiah squandered them. And it was a direct factor in the ultimate judgment of Judah as a nation. We too have been granted tremendous blessings. And we should continue to pray for peace in our times. We get to enjoy tremendous liberties. And if we fail to utilize them, how are we any better than Hezekiah? If we assume that we are going to be able to go door to door, putting door knockers on doors for the rest of time, or at least in my lifetime, that's going to be the case, we're no better than Hezekiah. We ought not to squander these privileges. Will we squander the ability that we have to speak freely to our co-workers? Or when the day comes, the day will come when we will not be allowed to speak that way. It might be a year from now, it might be 20 years from now, but I do believe eventually the freedom will go away. Will we have wasted it? Will we have thrown it away? Or will we have utilized it? Will we be able to hold our head up high and say, I did the best I can? Will we be able to say with Paul, I have run the race? I did not cower in my day. So which are you saying? Are you set back, satisfied, comfortable in your own skin? Perhaps the more valuable question, though, is, again, as Nate said, the more valuable question is which describes your life. Because talk is cheap. Are you content with this world's good, perhaps even willing to sacrifice your children's future for your temporal benefit? Or is the next generation's spiritual well-being so important to you that it affects how you live? And this doesn't apply only to those of us with children. You could say, well, guess, Elijah, you've got 3 kids. You've got a lot of responsibility, but I'm child-free. I don't have to worry about this. No, that still applies very much to you because, as Nate said, they're watching you, too. My children are watching each of you. Your children are watching me. And how you live now, if you are complacent, as it did to Hezekiah's children, it had catastrophic consequences. Complacency of Hezekiah. And none of us should want that for our lives or for the lives of our children. So I pray, let us consider, where do we stand? Have we gotten comfortable and selfish? Have we gotten complacent? Do we not care about what happens to the next generation? Do we not care what happens in our lifetimes after we pass off of the scene? Rest assured, your time will come. Might be sooner, it might be later, but it will come. And if you've been complacent about the opportunities that have been offered you in salvation, it's too late. When the rapture happens and you haven't accepted it, it's too late. If, God forbid, one of us is in an accident, you haven't accepted Christ, it's too late. Don't be complacent. Do not be complacent.